If you've been super busy these last few years with the never-ending demands of life and work, maybe you haven't heard about the current political attacks on trans people yet. The rest of us are becoming disheartened and fearful of the future. In many different states, legislation has been brought forward that focuses on pushing trans people into the shadows and taking away their rights. The trans debate that's been happening lately is another wave of these decades-long culture wars that our dominant political parties are participating in. These culture war issues such as abortion, LGBTQ+ rights, and religious freedoms are all generally distractions from issues with a larger societal impact concerning things like political and corporate corruption, lacking education, abysmal welfare in public facilities, lack of worker rights, and over-imprisonment of minorities, etc. Watch my video on culture wars for more on that. Unfortunately, regardless of the reasons for these attacks, the impacts of culture wars on minorities and disadvantaged communities has very real negative effects. This trans debate, in my opinion, makes no sense. I mean, are we really debating taking away the rights and freedoms of a small minority of people? But let's break it down anyway, for anyone who might be on the fence about this. The argument from conservatives against trans girls in sports is that they believe trans girls and women will have a genetic advantage over cis women, as if children and people in general play sports simply for the chance of playing professionally someday, or even to be the best in their districts. This argument also ignores the many other advantages people may have over one another, like age, height, body type. Finally, gender, sex, and gender presentation all lie on a spectrum. There are less differences between men and women than we are led to believe. Hi, I'm Kristen, and I'm just shouting out to space and hoping somebody hears. All culture wars affect the people, often minorities, who are at the forefront of these issues in some way or another. AFAB people without access to abortion are essentially forced to experience a pregnancy they can't have or don't want. Religious exemptions are allowing businesses to treat their employees differently and openly discriminate against customers. Masculine people of color have been overwhelmingly imprisoned over drugs, destroying countless families. And now trans people are losing basic freedoms of public safety through bathroom bans, and even efforts to ban trans people from public office in different states. Over 500 different new bills have been put forward directly attacking the trans and non-binary community. The mostly white male conservative politicians using these culture war tactics are attempting to drive their evangelical and misogynistic base to the polls out of fear, as well as to convince some moderate voters who are largely unaffected to vote along with them. The societal hierarchy has in many ways benefited these people over generations, so they see LGBTQ+ people living outside of that hierarchy as a direct attack on their way of life. But let me get back on track. Kids will be missing out on the many benefits of sports because politicians need another distraction from the real issues now that elections are ramping up. First of all, children are placed into sports for many reasons, but the main one should not be for the child to be the best at that sport, because in reality, most people will never be the best. You're setting up your kid for failure if they expect to be the best or even good enough to go into professional sports. The reality is that most kids won't make it. Instead, we should encourage sports for the emotional, physical, and social benefits. With sports, children can learn to work together in a team. They learn how to win and lose gracefully, which can go a long way in the professional world. This will give kids something to do, which often prevents them from turning to crime, drugs, and other bad behaviors. Children have lots of energy to burn, and placing them in sports helps them with that. Putting kids in sports may also give parents more time to work longer hours, or in an ideal world, even have some free time. Adults like to play sports outside of professional leagues too. People have made up countless sports teams in their local areas to keep playing. They aren't trying to be professional, they are playing for the other benefits that come with sports. You get to meet new people, potentially make friends, exercise and stay fit, and just have some fun. Plus, there are tons of studies showing the emotional and physical benefits from working out. Working out and playing sports tends to relieve stress, help the body produce feel-good hormones, alleviate feelings of depression, and statistically, being active helps you live a longer life. Well, depending on the sport you get into, football and MMA are pretty violent sports that might actually negatively impact many competitors for their entire life, but that's a whole nother video. Children mature at different rates, and some will have a genetic advantage over others, regardless of gender identity. This hasn't been a real issue. Other areas such as age differences in children, financial differences, and various genetic advantages don't seem to matter much either. No one suggests that these children shouldn't be able to continue playing because their parents had more money for special practices or because kids can be different ages in the same grade. Some children are taller than others. Some kids are faster than others. Some people have a genetic advantage over others. Usually we recognize and applaud these people at the highest levels. Olympians like Michael Phelps have a clear genetic advantage over everyone in their sport. His body produces less lactic acid, so he cramps and weakens at a slower rate than most people. Should we ban him from playing? Many gymnasts have a small stature. They have a genetic advantage over taller gymnasts. They simply have better balance because of their height. Most NBA players are over 6'5". They have a genetic advantage too. They are closer to the hoop, making shooting far easier with less effort. If we look into it enough, you'll likely find some genetic advantage in most players at the top of their game. Either that or, very rarely, some freak accident resulting in superhuman-like sports ability a la Teen Wolf. Or Pitch Perfect.
How long will he have to be in the cast?
Obviously, they worked hard as well, but they do have an edge that cannot be matched by other people, simply because of the genes they were born with. So should we ban these people from sports too? According to preliminary research, trans women on gender-affirming hormones for a year or more will actually have abilities that are comparable to cis women. So they should get to play with the people they are best qualified to play with, other women. Trans men taking testosterone for 2 years are often able to gain muscle mass and abilities similar to cis men. There are only a few studies available, but it seems that when taking gender-affirming hormones, trans people physically become more similar to the cis competitors and teammates inside and out. So the argument that trans women would be substantially better than cis women in sports has no real basis. People making the argument that trans women athletes are dominating even struggle to find good examples of this to use as a defense for these effectively harmful law changes. Yes, some trans women have won various sports competitions around the world, but they are far from dominating. Conservatives just cherry-pick examples of trans people winning competitions. There are many examples of these same trans people losing competitions to cis women that I could pick out for you to base your opinion on too. Leah Thomas, for instance, one of the trans athletes forced into the trans debate over her wins in swimming, did not break any records.
This morning, Leah Thomas, the first openly transgender athlete to win an NCAA Division I title, tying in 5th in Friday's 200-yard freestyle race.
Instead, a cis woman, Kate Douglas, has broken several swimming records just recently. What I think needs to happen is gender neutrality in sports. Segregating sports by sex just leaves too many people out, including cis people. The difference between men and women is just not that big, and as society becomes more accepting of queer identities, the lines between the two are blurring more and more. Instead of sex-based teams, we could reclassify sports in other ways, especially in schools. I mean, there's little reason for kids to be playing sex-segregated sports. There are already sports in schools that are mixed genders, such as cheerleaders. They can successfully work together as a team regardless of sex. Many cisgendered women have exceeded in sports to such an extent that they make their way onto teams made of mostly cis boys and men. There is little issue here, so how is allowing trans and non-binary kids to play sports with cis children going to cause any real problems? People are incredibly diverse, and segregating sports by genitalia is just limiting many people from accessing sports. There are cis women who are capable of competing against cis men, and girls who are fighting to join the boys' teams. There are also cis men who cannot hold a light to an average cis woman, boys who struggle to compete against the girls. Not only cis people who just happen to be born at the far ends of the gender spectrum, but also non-binary and intersex people who struggle to find common place with either side of the spectrum are being left out of the sporting community. Regardless of who you are, it takes time, effort, and relentless practice to become good at a sport. So anyone who has done this should be free to attempt to join in the fun. I can't imagine the person I would be today if I couldn't play softball, basketball, and soccer as a child. I also went to tennis camp and did karate after school. I am still an active person, and a lot of that I owe to my active childhood. I was always one of the shortest kids in my class. I was genetically disadvantaged by my height in basketball. I was the only AFAB person in my karate class, so I was disadvantaged there too, but none of that mattered to me. I still had fun. I learned a lot of lessons and made many friends through these activities. Classifying sports in a gender-neutral way for adults can get a bit more complicated, but I think we're smart enough to figure it out. We could have multiple levels of competition, like elite, pro, and advanced. People with lots of genetic advantages like height and muscle mass and good skills can compete in elite fields. People with skills and some genetic advantages can play in a pro league and an advanced league for people who are above average in terms of skill with little to no genetic advantages at all. Let's look at basketball for an example. Players are usually very tall, so genetically, height is a big advantage. Another genetic advantage men generally have over women is higher VO2 levels, meaning they can process oxygen in the body more efficiently, giving them better stamina. So another qualification could be those VO2 levels. Muscle mass can also be a qualification. The NBA, or the most advanced league, the elite league, would still be dominated by men with these qualifications. Then taller than average people, maybe 5'8" and above, and of course those who work hard at becoming skillful at the sport can play in a pro basketball league. People whose VO2 levels are somewhere between the average of men and women. Then a minor league for the shorties like me. I mean, I guess it depends if people would want to watch that, but I digress. I think many sports would be interesting with mixed gender teams. Of course, tryouts would still be required. It takes time and practice to be good at any sport. I just think we should open up sports to all competitors. Classifying groups by sexual organs just leaves too many people out. There's definitely better ways to do this. The Olympics and sport competitions were created to show normal people how powerful and amazing the human body can be. It makes no sense to limit people from competing just because they could potentially be too good. Caster Semenya, an Olympic athlete at the top of the game, was not allowed to compete against other women until she lowered her natural testosterone levels through hormone treatment. She is a cis woman, but based on her higher levels of testosterone, she was excluded from competing at her full ability. Anyone who has gone through all the trouble, pain, and suffering from not fitting into societal standards and presenting as something other than what society wanted, as well as putting the time and effort into sports, should be able to at least try out. And against the science that's available shows that trans women have similar abilities to cis women after hormonal treatment. So there's really no reason to treat trans women and cis women differently in the sports world when there's no quantifiable advantages between them. This particular issue about trans people playing sports is just one of many from this massive political attack on the trans community. States are making bans on books in schools, bans on language, and bans on gender-affirming care for even adults. They are trying to stop public performances of drag. Drag happens in so many different forms. You all know Mrs. Doubtfire was a kids movie and we all loved it.
I hope you are using jungle rape because that is the only color I love.
Matches your lips.
God bless you. You know, I'm feeling fabulous because I met this beautiful Cuban. Every night is like the Bay of Pigs. I can't lie to you, it's beautiful with him.
If you really want to get into this, what about Mickey Mouse? That's right, he's in drag too. That's right, Mickey Mouse is almost always performed by a woman.
So, did you like your surprise?
Like it? Oh, Mickey, I loved it! I think today might be the best day ever!
Oh gosh, Minnie, every day with you is the best day ever.
Oh, Mickey!
Aww.
Are we going to ban Mickey? The trans debate is absolutely soaked in hypocrisy.
I've heard you talk about parents' rights to raise their kids how they want. In fact, I just double-checked. You voted no on making it illegal for kids to be married to adults at the age of 12 if their parents consented to it. You said actually that should be the law because it's the parents' right and the kids' right to decide what's best for them to be by an adult. Okay?
Do you know any kids who have been
With
married
marriage.
at age 12?
That was the law.
do you know
You
any
voted
kids-
not to change it.
Do you know any kids who have been married at age 12?
I don't need to.
I do. And guess what? They're still married.
Gentlemen.
This is all a fascist level attack on supposed free people. And I want to make it clear that I'm not using that word lightly. This attack on trans people falls in line with many of the early red flags of fascism. Disdain for human rights, rampant sexism, controlled mass media, religion and government intertwined, rampant cronyism and corruption.
Anyway, I've got...
Regardless of where you lie in the spectrum of sex and gender presentation, everyone really suffers from these distractionary politics and moral panics because we continue to ignore and push incredibly important issues to the sidelines, basically in order to discriminate against minorities who have always existed. This may sound like whataboutism, but the point I'm trying to make is that many politicians are creating imaginary issues as a distraction from the fact that they are often funded by organizations like gun lobbies and religious groups in order to legislate discriminatory and harmful viewpoints. As elected officials, they are actively creating problems rather than solving them. These issues, such as people's freedoms of expression and protecting children from gun violence, are overwhelmingly supported by the majority of Americans. But these politicians are listening to their wallets over their constituency. Discrimination against the LGBTQ+ community may not be new to us, but in terms of human history, the LGBTQ+ community has been around even longer. There are countless examples of LGBTQ+ people living throughout recorded human history who are allowed to live and exist freely in their society, from same-sex couples depicted in ancient Egypt to more recent examples of gender non-conforming identities in other cultures like the ladyboys of the Philippines.
คือจำความได้อะคุณแม่เล่าให้ฟังอีกครั้งหนึ่งว่าตอนเด็กๆเนี่ยตอน3 ขวบใช่ไหมแอบขโมยลิปสติกแอบขโมยชุดคุณแม่แอบขโมย
And the two spirits of Native America.
You're born with two spirits. And you will know when you're born with that because you'll know when you're born, when you'll know you're different. That's when you know who you really are.
These people are not outcasted for their differences, but accepted. But let's not pretend that outcasting and discriminating against people will stop them from finding themselves and existing as openly as possible. I personally know for a fact that keeping queer language out of schools doesn't stop kids from being queer because I went through it myself. I realized my own identity slowly and painfully while being raised in a Catholic environment. The fact that my schools didn't talk about queerness in a positive light did not stop me from finding myself. It was just a lot harder. Ironically, that Don't Say Gay bill might have actually been good in the church I went to, considering they said gay a lot, but only to mention that we would all be burning in hell. I wonder if that's what DeSantis meant when he created that bill. Anyway, my classmates could tell I was different and I was bullied, but I didn't know why. My only real access to other identities was in the media. After years of feeling wrong for not liking any of the boys in my life, I eventually realized that I was attracted to the same sex at 14, when I had my first overwhelming crush on a person, and they were another girl. I struggled a lot with this realization. I was the most depressed I have ever been in my life, mostly because of the societal implications of being queer. I was often shown that I would be rejected by everyone around me, and burn in hell. None of this ever made me any less queer. Instead, it made me depressed, resentful, and isolated me from my friends, my family, and my community. It was not something I could repress, as much as I may have tried. Then as I got older, around college age, I was becoming more aware of how I did not fit in with the gender binaries, and I took on the non-binary label. I was always non-binary and queer. It just took me longer to figure that out because I was not given the language or basic understanding to realize that I was not broken, just different. I was far from alone. I can't even count how many of my former classmates came out as LGBTQ+ over the last decade. I also recently found proof that my difference is genetic in the form of a letter from my mother's OBGYN while she was in her first trimester with me. Her doctors believed I was going to be born a boy because I had higher male hormone levels in utero. Turns out I'm somewhere in between. I was assigned female at birth, but ended up with lots of masculine tendencies. I played many different sports as a kid. If I had the language and used the labels that I use today, I may have been excluded. I did not choose to be different, but I am. Rather than forcing myself to be something that I'm not, I decided to be free. I was born this way, and so are other trans, non-binary, and intersex people. Anti-LGBTQ+ parents of queer people have a choice to make: their discriminatory viewpoints or their child. Repressing queerness simply does not stop it from existing. If you reject your child, they may reject you right back when they become an adult.
They had signs with the rainbow, and it said, repent.
Horrified. Who are these people that are my neighbors that I thought were cool people?
Yeah.
And wow, no.
And the message they're sending
Yes.
to our youth.
And unfortunately, I know that message all too well because I was one of them. And I hurt my daughter.
I remember you.
Let's not forget that being trans is far from easy. Our society treats trans and non-binary people poorly. Trans and non-binary people are far more likely to experience depression, bullying, domestic violence, and hate crimes than most people. So nobody is choosing to be trans or non-binary without good reason. And again, the trans community makes up such a tiny proportion of the population, so it really makes no sense to be attacking this community simply for existing. Here is a group of beautiful queer people living in fascist Germany. Look how happy they are. Unfortunately, we know how their story goes, but ours is not finished. We have survived attempted genocides, erasure from history, and social alienation, but here we are still standing. We have been here, and we will always be here, and we need to fight for our safety before this goes too far, before history repeats. While other queer adults and I are firm in our identities, the people who will be hurt the most by these attacks are children, who just happen to be a little different, but don't really know why yet. The real concern we should have right now is mainly for trans, intersex, and non-binary kids facing potential bullying and mistreatment from classmates, teachers, doctors, and society at large. Trans and non-binary youth are at a higher risk for fatal self-harm attempts, largely because of the way society outcasts them. The number one cause of death of children in the US today is gun violence, but instead of dealing with this very real issue children are facing, we are causing more problems and harm, and driving kids that are already at risk into isolation and depression, while simultaneously validating their bullies and oppressors. States like Florida are literally making it easier for people to discriminate against trans and non-binary people, directly making it harder for them to live their lives. How are people seeing this as a good thing? If you have the means, consider donating to organizations helping trans and non-binary youth, like the Trans Youth Equality Foundation, Stand With Trans, and the Trevor Project. Thank you for watching. Honestly, I would love to make more like this, but it takes a lot of research. I mean, just look at all those links in the description. So if you like this video, please do the things like, subscribe, leave a comment below, and let me know if you're interested in more content like this, and I'll catch you on the next one.